All right, now those were excerpts from the guests that we had yesterday, the first part of our discussion on the 2020 appropriation bill tabled by President Muhammadu Buhari before the joint session of the National Assembly on Tuesday this week. Now we have guests with us here in the studios as well as at our Kaduna Network Center to provide their own perspectives on the issues. First, let's welcome Honorable Babangida Ibrahim. Honorable Babangida Ibrahim is the current chairman of the House Committee on Capital Markets and Institutions. Pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Thank you, sir.
Also here with us is our regular economic analyst, Dr. Emeka Okengo, who is a development economist. Dr. Okengo, pleasure to have you again.
It's an honor to be here. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, and joining us for the conversation from our Kaduna studio is, Yushao Ango actually is our guest in Kaduna, but when the coast is clear, we will be able to join him. All right, now he is on the line now, and let's once again welcome to the program Associate Professor Yushao Ango, Dean, Postgraduate School, Kaduna State University. Thank you for joining us this morning on the program.
Good morning.
All right, Kinsley, gentlemen, you're welcome. And this is the second stanza of our conversation on Budget 2020 as presented by the President to the National Assembly. You just watched the excerpts from our guests yesterday on this subject matter. And for your own perspective, let's begin with Emeka Okengo.
Thank you very much. I think let's do a little SWOT. What you call, strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats of that presentation. Let's start with strength. Beautifully prepared document, timely presented, and we must give kudos to both the executive and the National Assembly. It is just not that you have prepared a beautiful document. It's also now for the first time being timelined. And this is the first time in a long time you're seeing the National Assembly actually bring out a calendar of events of how they intend to deal with our budget. Having said that, let us also now recognize that it is what it is. It is a financial plan that you have couched in figures. So it is not all about that beautiful, well-prepared document. It is for us to now be able to now look at where we might be able to find what you call the weaknesses and the threats. And a lot of it, are also captured in the document. The president was, frank and fair enough, to also mention some of his weaknesses. First, he talked about the global, economic meltdown. He talked about the local challenges we have. And then most of all, he also talked about the focus on being able to generate revenue. Because remember, that budget as a plan can only become functional when you now have what you call a consistent revenue inflow. So if you don't have revenue against all those beautiful plans you have, it's not going to work. So for me, I would say that yes, it's a beautiful document, well documented, well put together, but we must be able to now juxtapose this beauty against what you might call the fault lines. Fault line number one will be the position of the National Assembly on the MTEF. Fault line number two will be, against the revenue projections of 8-point-something trillion. In the past, what have we been able to get as revenue generations? Fault line number three will now be the focus of what you call your critical infrastructure, all right, as against what you call your social infrastructure. Fault line number four will now be, what you call your implementation strategy. Are you able to now build the required synergies? Okay, because right now, allocations have been made, as it were, on silo basis. Power has its own allocation, Works and Housing has its own. Education is broken into two. You now have universal primary education having about 100 and something billion, and then you have agriculture, you have water resources. How are we able, against the facts or known facts, that we might not be able to now meet these revenue streams, to be able to now make certain that these things are implemented fully? How are we able to now build what you call very strong synergies, okay, and then decouple this expenditure and then identify probably three broad sectors of implementation? One, those sectors that you will call fundamental and foundational. Two, those sectors that you will now call the support, infrastructure support sectors. And then three, those sectors you now call your revenue, generating, sectors. And against all, how are we able to get Nigerians to contribute on a sustainable basis to the income stream that will be helping to drive, this budget? I think as we go along, I'll be able to now throw my more highlights on it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Emeka Okengo. Let's go over to our Kaduna Network studios, where we will introduce Associate Professor Yushua Ango, who is of the Kaduna State University, where is the Dean of School of Postgraduate Studies. Associate Prof, let's have your take on the broad outlines of the appropriation bill.
Yes, I think the budget, from my understanding, clearly is a budget that is probably proposed in consideration of our situation. This is a country that was that faced some challenges and had recession at a point, and we're happy that we have been out of recession now for 9 quarters. The budget has also brought out the growth that we have witnessed in the various quarters and the various years, and the target globally and the target within the sub-Saharan Africa. The way we are growing, or we propose to grow, is such that we have not been able to meet up with the overall, even sub-Saharan African target, but is progressing nonetheless accordingly. Clearly, what the budget has in terms of the total amount that is supposed to be spent vis-a-vis the total revenue that is expected to be generated is a matter that shows that we have, there is a need to drive revenue, for this country. As a country that is growing in population over these years, we also have challenges, serious challenge to generate revenue. Now, of course, one of the things or the measures taken, or rather, since even the implementation of the economic plans of this administration has been to improve revenue from the perspective of non-oil sector, and even this budget has shown that the non-oil sector will provide a lot more revenue expected, more than the oil sector. But obviously, we have a challenge of growing our revenue, and without growing our revenue, we will not be able to do what we need to do, which is to grow and develop our infrastructure, and all that. So there is a challenge, and I'm happy that the economic team recently established has met with the president, and I hope one of the things they will come out with, in addition to fighting the issues of poverty in Nigeria, should be a lot on how we can generate revenue without putting much pain on the populace, and then also how to develop our infrastructure. I think those are the challenges which came out. There is a challenge of revenue generation. We are growing, especially in the non-oil sector, but I think it's still a challenge.
Okay, well, we'll certainly return to you in due course. Now back to Abuja, where we have Honorable Babangida Ibrahim. Babangida Ibrahim, of course, is the chairman of the House Committee on Capital Market and Institutions. Now, you have a huge job in your hands, presently, and considering your position as the chairman of Capital Market and Institutions, you are certainly going to play a big role in doing the rest of the job remaining with respect to the 2020 budget. That's trying to do the scrutiny and, of course, do your own adjustments to return to the president for ascension into law. Now, what is it for you in that budget? You were there at the presentation. What is it for you? What are the tipping points, or those striking aspects of the budget?
Well, let me start by saying that, the medium-term expenditure framework is the basis upon which the budget is prepared. And the parameters presented on MTEP, that the benchmark, the crude price, and the exchange rates production. Government this time around try as much as possible to be realistic, because the average production in the 2019 performance up to September, August, is about 1.87 trillion. And the production was 2.3 in 2019, and it was brought down to 2.18 trillion, taking into consideration that we are likely to meet it. You see, in the National Assembly, anytime those documents are presented to us, we try to, as much as possible, to invite the executive arms, those agencies that are responsible for those areas, to come and brief us. How realistic is it? And in most cases, they give us the hope that taking into consideration some of the measures they put in place, you'll be able to meet up. If you notice, the exchange rate has been there for over 5 years. It's always 305, 305, 305. We don't have much concern with the exchange rate because it's mostly used for conversion purposes. So what I'm saying is that the budget of our 10 trillion was what the government planned to do. If you look at the mainstay of the 2020 budget, the consolidation of the macroeconomy, foreign direct investments, improvement on social investment program, and involving private partnership. Because if you have infrastructure decay, government alone cannot sustain and provide solution for infrastructure. So by engaging the private sector, I think it will go a long way in mitigating the challenges we have with infrastructure. And another very important issue that has to do with the budget is this increase on the BAT, which they want to increase from 5 to 7.5%. And the surplus from that increase is targeted in enhancing some of the deficit areas of the budget. But there are some critical and most important things that we have to be on the watch, which the National Assembly, we are going to look at it during the debate. The threshold on the 25 million turnover. Because I keep wondering, you see, BAT is a consumption tax. Now, if you are putting a threshold on companies, at what point at the market level will you determine which company provide what and for what? It's going to be absolutely very difficult. And this area, I think, we're going to organize a public hearing on the finance bill. And this is a very important area that we have to look at, because if company A has a turnover of 30 million, company B has a turnover of 18 million, and all of them are providing taxable items. And those taxable items are consumptions. The people consume them and they go to the same market. Now, at what point do you segregate which product is provided for a company that has a turnover of less than 25 and above 20? It's going to be almost impossible to implement that aspect. And during the public hearing, we'll listen to them while they put the thresholds, and we see whether it's going to be possible or not.
Okay, Honorable Ibrahim, thank you very much. Kieran, yesterday you recall the VAT threshold was one of the issues that our guest also talked about. I mean, the nature, first of all, there is need to go back. I'm sure you take that into consideration in the course of your public hearings. The real nature of VAT, value-added tax, and whether the threshold now provided for exemption, being 25 million naira as a turnover of a company, is being camouflaged perhaps as company's income tax or otherwise. So those are issues that you worry about. Let's return to Emeka Okengo. You already outlined, some of, shall we say, the red flags. Earlier you talked about the position of the National Assembly on the MTEP, that's the medium-term expenditure framework, plus other issues. Let's get some of the details from what you earlier highlighted.
Okay, like I said, it's important that when you are looking at a document, you look at it from two broad perspectives. Okay, a budget is a generic document, as it were. Most of the times, you have what you call, your windows or your envelopes. So all you need to do is to be able to put into those envelopes, and then you now begin to juxtapose it against your revenue stream. What is most important for us to be looking at is, if we say we are going to be spending 2.4 million on capital infrastructure. What infrastructure are we talking about? Are these infrastructure that are going to be social infrastructure? Are this infrastructure going to be critical infrastructure? And what is the difference between social infrastructure and critical infrastructure? Okay, to the man probably in my Malari village in Sokoto, okay, a hospital might be critical infrastructure. To somebody who is in Abuja who has alternatives, a hospital might be social infrastructure. So in trying to now define what it is that can be able to unlock this budget, and we are talking about revenue streams, I just want to give you a typical example. A lot of us have forgotten that there was an organization called the PTF in this country that was actually earning more money on a daily basis than government. What was PTF doing? It was just a policy statement to say this is the amount that is coming in as landing cost of fuel, and government was going to be adding 3 naira on top of it, and every Nigerian who was buying petrol was paying that tax. That was very innovative. And then just based on the fact that everybody now contributed to the PTF, a lot of revenue came. And I stand to be corrected. I do not think that there has been any government or that has spent as much on infrastructure as that fund did. Just one fund. So if we're looking at this budget and government says to you, we are cash strapped, you don't even need government to say that, Kingsley. We are cash strapped. Okay, and then you have a debt service overhang of over 2.4 trillion already on your head, and you have a deficit of over 2 trillion already on your head, and you now have an income stream that you're going to be projecting against something you know that is very dicey right now. And we are not even now talking about looking at this our valorization production model that was practiced a very long time. And they were looking at, okay, when we talk about VAT, each time people talk about VAT, I said to them, can we give an elementary meaning to VAT? Value added tax. Now, what are you value adding? Most of the things that we now use to now calculate our taxes are actually final products of other people that we buy as raw materials. Okay? I'll give another typical example here. There is a small fund that they call the Solid Minerals Development Fund. Okay? Now, what are they supposed to be doing? They are supposed to be going to now look for projects in the solid mineral sector. Yobe is classified as one of the poorest states in Nigeria. However, take this and take it to the bank. In Yobe, there is 900 million metric tons of bentonic clay. 900 million. And do you know what bentonic clay is? It is a major ingredient for drilling mud. Now imagine if government gives a matching order to that small fund to say, you know what it is you're going to be doing. Part of what we want you to do as this fund is that you must be able to get 30% to 40% of that income coming in to be able to now support our revenue stream. Another example, so I don't take a lot of time. I do a lot of road trips. Everybody thinks that the cocoa belt is in Western Nigeria. You'll be shocked that from Lokoja until you get to Enugu, the cocoa pods that you see on the roads are as big as pawpaw. Now, and do you know what it is? In that whole stretch of road, all you see are little subsistence pedestrian farmers. Imagine a situation where we also now have an agricultural program, and I'm talking about critical infrastructure now, to be able to now support what it is we're talking about. So in us trying to get out of this, government has said we are not going to be employing more people. That's what the president has said. He also says you must create jobs for 10 million people. Now, to some other person, it sounds like a paradox, isn't it? But what I think the president is technically saying is you must be able to get this project to support the private sector. Now, this is where, again, another challenge comes. Where is the private sector? Where is the rail sector? How does these projections or allocations that we have, probably 20-30%, are we able to now use it to now support this creation of 10 million jobs? So in all, the major fault line of this budget will be for us not to understand that any wrong expenditure that is not linked, okay, to now being able to now develop what you call demand-driven and result-oriented infrastructure programs and outputs would be pouring water down a long drain.
Okay,
I think
Kieran, I know that you want to take over. The issue of cocoa that you raised, started as an example.
Yes.
It was talking about, some people having the misperception that which is cocoa belt is mostly in the western part of the country. I'm not sure what the latest figures are, but between Ondo and Cross River State, you have the leading cocoa producing state in the Federation. And coming third will be Edo State. And then, of course, you have all the other states. So it's an entire belt. But the point you made in terms of dealing with the value chain in our cocoa production is very significant.
It is indeed. I think the most crucial aspect of this conversation with respect to the 2020 budget is the aspect of revenue generation, internally generated revenue that we use to actually implement the budget. And let's go to Kaduna once again. Yushao Ango, you've listened to Dr. Emeka Okingwu and all the fault lines that he has raised. And I would like you also to bear your mind on the issue of the VAT, the increase in VAT, because Babangida Ibrahim also raised that as one of the very, very important issues that the National Assembly intends to look into properly, before they finally give a go-ahead. Now, what is your own consideration with respect to the slight increase from 5% to 7.5%? And in answering this question, I'd like you to add to that the issue of being in a position to achieve the SDG goals, considering ourselves, of course, as a developing nation. It's very fundamental if we're going to address those aspects of development that the nation deserves.
I have listened to the honorable member. Especially, I want to comment on the issue of putting the threshold at 25 million, companies that have turnover of 25 million and above. What I understand from that pronouncement is that in terms of collection, in terms of effort from the Federal Revenue Service and all that, they will focus more on companies who have turnover of more than 25 million naira. That means, that is not to say that those companies or agencies or wherever that have turnover of less than 25 million will be exempted. That is my own understanding. Now, as to the increase itself, I think sincerely, despite the fact that yes, we have an economy that has a preponderance of those who are living below poverty line, I think ours is probably one of the lowest VAT rates globally at 5%. So certainly it's time to increase it. And 2 years ago or thereabout, I was in Dubai when they started VAT. They didn't have it at all. And they started with 10%. So the same day also Saudi Arabia started with 10%. There is need to increase it. In any case, out of whatever is collected, 85% or thereabout of it goes to the states and local governments, not the federal government. And the president, in his statement, specifically said whatever increase they have will be deployed towards healthcare, education, and social investment programs. So I think in that regard, that is a very good initiative. So there is need to increase the VAT, in my opinion, because, like I said earlier, we have a revenue challenge. Now, with regards to what Dr. Emeka said also, he made mention of some pockets of funds, trust funds of various forms, and he mentioned one, and there are others. I mean, the Educational Trust Fund, for example, the Sugar Development Fund, and so many of them. What I don't know, and what is not very clear to me, and which is coming out, is that a lot of what those funds are doing are not captured in the budgets. So in a way, quite a number of activities are taking place, and they are not captured in the budget. Now, the government has been able to bring every revenue as much as possible into the TSA. And I think also it's important that in budgeting for whatever, from these various funds, their budget, whatever they plan to do, should also be brought under the ambit of somehow a global overall budget of the country, rather than for those funds to operate outside of the budget. There are also many other initiatives in terms of PPP initiatives. As part of the objective, of course, is to bring the private sector to come into the, in terms of provision of infrastructure. I think wherever things have been concluded, even if we are not using directly government funds to do such projects, there is a way. I mean, it would be good for us if we can bring some of those initiatives also into the kind of overall budget structure of the country, rather than keeping those things outside of the budget. And because, like, for example, you see a Federal Minister of Education having a budget of 40-something billion, and then, of course, if you go to TED Fund, you see the budget is much more than that. UBEC has a budget of 100 and something billion. Now, when you look at the educational sector and what is required, and you see 40-something billion, one would think that nothing is going to happen, not much is going to happen. But when you bring all the intervention agencies and funds, whatever they're going to do in, then we'll probably have a better picture of what the overall development trajectory is going to be in that sector of the economy. So that is my take on this.
Oh, okay, Ishmael Ango, thank you very much. We would like to pursue further the issue that you've just elaborated on, following from what Emeka Okengu said. Now, in the President's presentation to the National Assembly, he did reference UBEC, which is Universal Basic Education Commission. That is also one of the special intervention areas. But Emeka Okengu has drawn our attention to the solid minerals. We also know that you have the Sugar Fund, you have the Petroleum Technology Development Fund, and I'm sure there's one or two things concerning cereals or rice and all of that. Honorable Babangida Ibrahim, does the National Assembly have a full picture of these other funds that are, of course, spent according to law as purposes, for the overall development or economic growth of the country? Do you also capture all of that in it?
You see, it is very important to note that we have what we call statutory cooperations. And statutory cooperations mostly are those agencies that by Fiscal Responsibility Act and by the act establishing them, they generate their revenue, they implement government policy, they have their mandate, and in doing so, at the end of the day, that's why they said they should provide and remit certain amount of operating surplus to the federal government according to the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So what I'm saying is that, you see, a budget and government policy, they go hand in hand. If government has a policy on education, the budget on education will be tailored according to the government policy. And when the president was making his presentation, specifically, he has highlighted some of the key areas where the government intends to focus in terms of 2020 fiscal year. You see, it is important for people to differentiate distributable revenue, a revenue that is accruing to the federal government. You see, most of those revenues are distributable revenues. At the end of the day, the state has a stake, the local government has a stake, and the federal government has a stake. In preparing a federal government budget, federal government concentrates on what is expected as the percentage portion of the federal government. That's what is captured in the budget. So you see, and when the president was making his presentation, clearly he has mentioned the intention of government to intensify our revenue generation. You see, there are revenues where we have control and there are revenues that we don't have control. For example, revenue from crudes or sales of crudes. In that aspect, the global market determines what happened in that area. When he was making his presentation, we had a drop in production from the targeted 2.3 to 1.87. But what complements that drop in production was the increase in the price of crude. We used $60 as benchmark, and the price rose to 67. So what I'm saying in essence is that, you see, most of statutory corporations that have responsibility in various critical sectors of the economy, they are under our view. And these are some of the areas that we also intend to focus in the 9th Assembly to make sure that all revenues are accounted for.
Well, Honorable Ibrahim, I'm not talking strictly about statutory corporations and how they're supposed to transmit their operating surpluses into government coffers. We're talking about special funds created by law. For instance, TED Fund or Education Trust Fund, as it was known, it's 2% of companies' income profits.
Yeah,
income profits. And then, of course, you also talked about solid minerals a while ago. There is also PDTF. That's part of what Yusua was talking about. And it could be misleading for analysts to assume that, oh, the figure announced by the president while making his budgetary presentation on the allocation to education necessarily captures the receipts by all of these other funds that sugar, for instance, and all of that. Does the National Assembly have this universal picture?
Yes, we do, because we have various committees that are responsible in oversighting those agencies. Part of the mandate of those committees is to look at the mandate of those agencies. How effective are the agencies implementing those mandates? If you notice that even in the Assembly, a lot of committees, ad hoc committees were raised, in most cases, on revenue of government. Because I remember one of the second ad hoc committee that was set up in the Assembly was on revenue generation. All those agencies that have responsibility on generating revenue were brought and were scrutinized. This education trust fund you are talking about, like you said clearly, is 2% of net profit of companies. And they goes into the account, and they hit the account, and there's a committee that is responsible in ensuring that those money are accounted for. If you look at UBEC also is captured under the normal traditional budgets. Whatever is sent to UBEC, because most of those agencies, some of the MDAs, apart from the normal budgets, they also have the generate revenue which complement. Let me give you an example. This is an NTA. In addition of the budget of NTA, you also generate revenue. And the fiscal responsibility allows you to spend part of what you generated. So that's what is applicable to most of the agencies. And that is one of the primary functions of the National Assembly, to conduct oversights.
I'm sorry, Dr. Okengo, do you have some clarity on this issue?
I think what is important for us to do is to, like I said, we are doing a SWOT on this. The president had listed some weaknesses and also made some demands. And the primary demand the president made is that he wants this to be an inclusive budget. He wants an inclusion of everybody, social inclusion, financial inclusion. What that simply means is that we must be able to look at the way we've done things in the past. If we're not very careful, we will keep running this red tape. And then when people use the word red tapeism, they don't understand that that is what stifles government programs. For instance, the question will be, is there a relationship between the SMDF, which is called Solid Minerals Development Fund, and the Ministry of Defense in Operations? Now, the answer will be, why would they be? But if you now deepen it to now go and start asking about the carrot and stick question, now the carrot and stick will be, is it possible for the SMDF to collaborate with the Ministry of Defense to open mines in these theaters of war? Okay, so that you can now begin to now get catchment areas that can be able to now absorb people who probably have gotten into this thing out of the frustration of no job. Now, another question will be, is there a relationship between the Ministry of Water Resources and the Sugar Council? Okay, is there a relationship between the Ministry of Water Resources, the Sugar Council, and the Ministry of Lands? Before you even now bring in the Ministry of Agriculture. Is there a relationship between the Ministry of Science and Technology in all these little things we're talking about? We're talking about inclusive growth. So if you don't understand it, and then you're not able to say to the SMDF, there has to be a synergy that is built around everybody here, who are now the revenue generating agencies. To what extent are we able to support your operations with the budget of a line ministry? Okay, to what extent are we able to now create a cooperation between you and these other people? Now, if you don't do that, let me tell you, for me, the most important ministry in this country, if we're going to be building inclusive growth, and I'm very happy that the chairman is here, is the Ministry of Science and Technology. Something will shock you, that everything that supports agriculture is under the Ministry of Science and Technology. NABDA, okay, which is a major research agency, is under the Ministry of Science and Technology. The Gamma Irradiation program we have is under the Ministry of Science and Technology. Raw Materials and Research Development Agency is under the Ministry of Science and Technology. Now, the question will be, my brothers, what is the collaborative efforts? What is the synergy? What is the interface? There won't be any. You know why? Because like Honorable says, there's a Fiscal Responsibility Act that cuts everybody's program out for him. Now, what this will do is that these agencies will take these capital projects, okay, put it onto ongoing projects, and a lot of them have uncompleted projects. And by the end of the budgetary season, you would have a beautiful document that has not been able to achieve much. Remember, in one of the administrations in the country, they now said, okay, we're going to now have a policy of insisting that every capital project must show a document, that produces 25% of jobs for Nigerians. How are you able to create this when you are not bringing these investments, okay, to be able to now face policy, which is what we call business actually now facing policy? This is a major challenge we have as a country, okay? I give you one very typical and resounding example. We talk about UBEC, of being universal education. What is the relationship between UBEC and your centers, your trade centers? You and I grew up in the days where anybody who had a trade test, a certificate from a trade center, was more qualified than any engineer who had a degree from the university. You know why? Because what you get in the university is the theoretical aspect of engineering. What you get from those trade centers, okay, and now the practical, that make the mechanics were all trained there, the artisans were all trained there. They were the skilled workforce. What is the relationship between UBEC, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Science and Technology, and those trade centers? Beautiful. So if you're not able to build, if you're not able to do that,
to understand that, you see, Professor, I don't know, we have to try to be realistic as possible.
Yes.
UBEC is an intervention agency.
It doesn't matter, but they have
what I'm saying is that, you
billion.
see, we are trying to discuss 2020 budgets.
Yes.
You see, I appreciate some of the challenges and issues he has been raising, but most of them has to do with maybe challenges of improving the revenue.
No, it has to do with challenges of physical discipline.
Because most of the relationships we are talking about, solid minerals, the military, the UBEC, Ministry of Education, trade tests, and whatever, these are issues that mostly are policies. And maybe what I'm trying to say is that UBEC is an intervention agency. They only intervene in the universities, tertiary institutions, and the rest of them.
Honorable Bangla Ibrahim, I think that Emeka Okengu raised very pertinent issues. Yes, you say we are talking about physical discipline. Some of these agencies we're talking about should work collaboratively to achieve an ultimate aim. If, for instance, we're talking about revenue generation, and two agencies cannot team up to see how whatever act of law that established them, that they cannot work together, that cannot be a synergy, then nothing can be workable. Now, he mentioned very, very crucial issue, which I raised yesterday, remember, Kinsley, when I asked a question about science and technology, which is the driver of all forms of development. In fact, it is the alter ego, because there is no sector that does not require science, technology, and innovation. And somehow, the National Assembly, over the years, perhaps from what we have experienced, have played down on that. If you look at even the budget for science and tech, it's very low. As a matter of fact, it didn't even get a mention this time around, and so on. So it is very, very pertinent, according to what Emeka said. And if you look at all the nations that have developed, the Asian tigers, who were part with Nigeria in the 70s, they have gone far, far beyond us in all aspects of development, education, agriculture, name it. And these are areas that require science and tech for them to move on.
Okay.
And that's just the matter. But when we return from this break, perhaps you come in again and let us know what you intend to do, because the ball is now in your court with respect to 2020 budget. This is Good Morning Nigeria. We will come back, and when we return, we will first we'll be doing the concluding part of the conversation. Do stay with us.
For more than 10 years, NTA Educational Television has continued to champion the discovery of young scientists and artists across the country. The 2019 National Children's Expo promises to bring to light the best of innovations and creativity in the science and arts categories. Theme: promoting unity and innovations in youths as agents of change through science and arts. Venue: NTA Headquarters Arena, Area 11, Garki, Abuja. Date: Sunday, October 20th to Thursday, October 24th, 2019. For more information, please call the following numbers. This event is proudly supported by NTA ETV, promoting learning.
Why don't you people sell imported materials here? As beautiful as the shop is.
See, buying foreign goods does not help our economy. Neither does it boost local production. And the good thing is Nigerian-made products are high quality. And to make Nigeria great again, that is why I only sell made in Nigeria products. Because change begins with me.
I'm convinced. Change begins with me too. Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We still have our guests, and we have had a number of tweets that have come in. Kira, you remember yesterday we were hard-pressed taking the tweets because we had 4 guests, and that was part 1 of our conversation. So today, we're going to take some of the tweets that have come in and then return to our guests. But Amasi Haruna Adamo tweets, it's one thing to present and pass a budget, another thing for the budget to be religiously and judiciously executed.
All right, from Delejak Solomon, as the Senate and House of Reps assure Nigerians of cooperation and speedy implementation of 2020 national budget, all hands must be on deck to see to the success of this bill, because Nigerians are tired of procrastination and lack of full implementation of budgets over the years.
Chris Simeon, the money, or rather the amount budgeted for recurrent expenditure is always bigger than the capital expenditure. And for us to attain development in this kind of scenario will still be a mirage.
Now, Mike Ayako says, one of the most important aspects of 2020 appropriation bill is completion of existing projects. This is awesome and a very welcome development. Mention should be made on security, health and education, as well as focus on the critical areas of the economy. Nigerians are impatiently waiting.
Now, Festus Akimboyewa, I was expecting the chunk of the budget to go for healthcare, education and pension. It worries me that the allocation for education and health is extremely low.
All right, Delejak Solomon, once again, the uniqueness of the 2020 budget is that appropriation bill seeks to establish a domestic tax law to align with global best practices, as well as support small and medium enterprises. Through this means, both local and foreign investors would be motivated to do business in Nigeria.
Dada Stephen has this tweet. Say, what is the use of 82 billion naira in water resources? All houses I know have boreholes and pumping machines. Our waterways are also full of water hyacinth, explanation is needed. Now, all homes and all houses don't have dams in the first instance, and we can't continue to rely on rain-fed agriculture. So part of irrigation that will come out from those major dams are things that the Water Resources Ministry would need that for, not just boreholes that we have in our homes.
Village Solomon says, while the federal government based the 2020 appropriation bill on the new tax rates to help finance health, education, and infrastructural programs in Nigeria, government must ensure it does whatever it requires to ameliorate the sufferings of the Nigerian people and budget is executed as planned.
This is from Omobola on Babs. The budget has exempted companies with less than 25 million naira annual turnover from VAT. Now, this the first in the history of Nigeria. Kudos must be given to Mr. President. This will ensure that those SMEs and MSMEs will not necessarily add their VAT burden on the masses who are final consumers. Again, this is part of the lingering confusion over how to implement that particular aspect. Does it mean that you go to a company that has a turnover of less than 25% that you will not be charged VAT from your purchases from that company?
It's indeed difficult to implement.
That's right.
Okay. Law Alpha C said the task is now left for the National Assembly to expedite action to meet up with the deadline and for the executive to ensure efficient implementation.
Okay, well, those are the tweets, Kyria, we can accommodate in the meantime.
Exactly.
I was just wondering, can we really, considering the circumstances of the 2019 budget and then the 2020 appropriation bill, bemoan the fact that we'll most likely have a revenue challenge in 2020? Let me put this on the table. The 2019 appropriation bill became a law in June this year. And part of what has also been applauded is the fact that we are trying to return to a January to December budgetary cycle. That's to say in 2020. But in conception, the 2019 budget was expected to run from June 2019 up until 2020. So, if 2020 is taken as a tabula rasa to say, look, we have nothing there, this is our proposal for it, this is how much we're expecting for 2020, this is how much we're expecting, we expect to spend, this will be the deficit, this will be our borrowing, XYZ. What will happen to the remainder of the aspects of the 2019 budget at the time that budget lapses by the provision of a clause in the 2020 Act that will override 2019 and say, okay, from 2020, fresh budget, but what will happen to all the issues in the 2019 appropriation, including the revenue stream that ordinarily would have gone up until June 2020?
Well, let me say that it is very important for people to note that the budget has three components: the personnel costs, the overhead cost, and the capital. The personnel aspect of the budget runs from January to December. There is no issue with that one. The overhead aspect of the budget runs from January to December. There is no issue of that one. So the issue of projected revenue, already we have a revenue challenge. So the major issue is on capital. And we are all aware over the years, we have never implemented capital 100%. Sometimes it's 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%. So by aligning the budget of 2020 of the capital aspect run from January to December, all it requires is that you now call it an act. And there is no act that cannot be amended by the National Assembly. So that particular clause in 2029 budget will be amended to allow the capital to terminate by the end of December or the date in which the budget is passed. And I don't think it will have issue, because already on the basis in trying to align the budget, government is rolling over 60% of capital to 2020 budget, which means the likely maximum capital implementation is going to be around 40%. It will be run over to the 2020 budget, and the budget will be aligned. But on the issue of whether the 6 months, it only affects capital aspect of it. And over the years, we have never exceeded 70% of implementation of capital. I think the last time I think it was in 2018 that we had about 70% implementation. So all the times, you find that we always have that particular deficit on implementation of capital. So there is no issue there.
But you see, Kingsley, what played out over the years has been abysmal implementation of national budget. The cycle was changed. And then what is left for National Assembly and the other actors is just whatever is possible, you get it done. So when this one lapses, another one begins. But if by the time the current administration returns the budgetary cycle to January to December, there could be a better planning. That could be better planning, in terms of not necessarily implementing the budgets, but then ensuring that whatever plans, whatever structure put in place to see how the government can generate revenue to implement those budgets. Because after all said and done, what is important here is implementation of policies of government enshrined in the budget.
Right. My point, the question I raised, and I would like the other guests to also speak to this, let's say Joshua Ango, it has to do with what you may now refer to as a transitional arrangement from Appropriation Act 2019 to Appropriation Act 2020 and whatever funds were embedded in it. I mean, the presumption could be that, okay, to the extent that we were quote-unquote lawless in implementing previous budgets, not having a budgetary performance capital up to 50% or 60%, so that now might serve our needs. I'm saying if there were revenue expectations to fund 2019 budget up until June 2020. Now, there are already revenue shortfalls, no doubt about that. But in terms of accounting, so that you don't say that 2020 is a tabula rasa, you were not expecting anything. That's the point that hang on a second. Hang on a second. Associate Prof. Joshua Ango, what's your take on this? I mean, is it a matter that can be explained?
So I think the honourable member has explained it very brilliantly. The recurrent aspect of it has already been spent. The capital aspect of it, even from the presidential pronouncement, they are rolling over, and they are not starting any new project except they have to. So that shows that it's a continuum. And then also, like the honourable member said, we have never been able to implement high percentage of the capital budget. Usually, in fact, in the previous administration, it used to be 30% or 20% or thereabout. Now, the realistic nature of this budget, in my opinion, is the fact that we are rolling over. We are not trying to start new projects. We are trying to finish those other projects. I think that the honourable member put it correctly. There is no confusion. There is no problem. They will just roll over, and those projects, and they will continue to spend on those projects that are already being implemented, and start few ones that are necessary. That is my understanding.
Okay, let's return to Dr. Emeka King. Dr. Emeka, the budget is pegged on oil benchmark of about $57 per barrel, with a projected deficit of about 2.18 trillion naira. You have actually identified fault lines in the budget. Now, if you are to be in charge of giving direction to what can be done, first to realize enough revenue to address the critical infrastructure, for instance, education, and other very important sectors of the economy, what would you do? And if you are perhaps on an advisory note, how would you now advise the National Assembly, who is presently working on the budget?
Thank you. I'm very happy when the Honorable said that it is a responsibility to be able to develop the laws that can make things run more smoothly. The first thing I will say to him is, let's go back to the days of our rolling plans. If we had a rolling plan, what you can call an implementation program, an implementation framework that now has a 3-year cycle, like the MTEF. Okay? Remember that you have your MTEF, your fiscal strategy paper. What you don't have now is a rolling plan, okay, that now ties you to outputs. If we had a rolling plan that ties to outputs, first and foremost, what you would have identified are those capital projects that needs to be completed so that they can now begin your revenue stream. I'll give you a very simple example. Abuja is densely populated. A lot of people live at all the angles of Abuja. Imagine if we had a light rail system that accounted for every citizen in this Federal Capital Territory spending a minimum of 2,000 naira, and you have about 5 million people. I just want to start talking about very, very practical revenue generation streams. Now, that monorail or rail project would have been top priority. Okay, that can you now capture in your implementation program. Each time, if you notice when you were talking about the projections of the millions of barrels, I cringed. Do you know why Niger Republic is refusing to start producing their oil? They say that they want to have it all thought through, that they are going to be having refineries before they start producing any crude. They are not interested in selling one drop of their crude. It is us only, go and check this history. We are the only country that are still operating what you call the multinational oil companies. All others in our league have all gone to their national oil companies. And what have they done? They are no longer interested in crude because they know that crude is what it is, crude. That where actually industrialization is what people call the byproducts of crude, which are the industrial gases. So for a country, if we now also decided that this is going to be fluctuating, is a market we are not sure of, we are selling crude, gentlemen, and then spending close to 95% of what we sell in crude to be able to now import the products that we are using. That comes out as crude, and it's actually the byproduct that nobody needs. You know why? There is no industry that runs on fuel. Fuel is leisure. So if we have an implementation program, and if the National Assembly can be able to sit down and say, okay, we make laws. Remember that what the president has just come to, present is an opinion, if you may, if you want to bring it out to what it is. The people who have the hammer and the nail is the man sitting in front of us. And by the time they finish, the president either says yes or says no. And they can upturn that 10 trillion we're talking about. Now, by the time they finish with it, they say it's 25 trillion. They have the powers to do that because it is them that by law that now produces the act. And if the president refuses to sign, they can even veto him. So every power, we should be holding the people in National Assembly to say, can you look at all these physical laws and see how they are now turning into a major stumbling block? You cannot have a president who has promised 100 million jobs, 10 million every year, and then in a budget says, I'm not going to be employing any new persons. And then you now have physical acts that now make it impossible for those sectors that can be able to now help him achieve his primary goal, which is to be able to get every Nigerian. I digress a little. Look at us talking about toll gates. Nigerians want good roads. You go to the social media and they say this government is evil. They are trying to reintroduce toll gates. Yet, people are going around taking photographs of roads and throwing it into the social media to say government is not doing anything. Yet, you don't want to toll the road. Because in tolling that road, you can actually introduce way bridges. Look at us talking about a market that has 30 trillion as output. And I'm talking about the cattle market. And then some people say, no, my land is not going to be part of it. But every morning, you go to their houses and there's no meat in their soup. No matter how close you are with them, their wife won't bring out that food. They would rather tell you that the soup has spoiled than bringing out food that has no meat inside it. Look at us that are talking about engaging into developing. We have 600,000 hectares of wasteland. India is producing jet rover. They are looking for wasteland. China has converted over 30% of its desert into greenlands using technology. What are they growing there? Jet rover, cactus or puntus. These are grasses that animals consume. Yet we have all this wasteland. We have over 300 dams in Nigeria. Not one has been tied to this NLTP program. Not one has been tied to forest production. Not one has been tied to agricultural production. Not one has been tied to any major. You know why? Because the honorable people are saying no. The Ministry of Water Resources will say, what's our business with the Ministry of Defense? Whatever it is they want to do, our own is to oversight them and make sure that they are bringing revenue and we're not oversighting them. It is not going to work. If we put in all these monies that we have put into capital, do you know what can happen? Would have been able to have now saved or put into place this major bulk that you need to be able to borrow against PPP projects. And then, sorry, on a last note, these projects will now begin to run on what you call project-based finance models. Do you know what it means? cash flows, so that you don't do anything that does not have a return on investment. It does not have to be physical cash. It can be human capital development. This is how your human capital development index begins to unlock. This is where we're missing it.
Yeah, Dr. Meka Okengo, thank you very much for the points you have raised. Just to indicate, I'm sure that some persons will disagree when you say that none of our dams is tied to agricultural production. I mean, the number of the dams.
No, that's what I didn't say that. I said it's not tied. Okay, please go ahead. Let me.
Yeah, that's what I had. What exactly did you want? Did
now,
you say?
What I was trying to say is that in using your dams, you do not build dams just for agriculture alone. Dams that have penstocks, okay, Zamfara, the dam in Zamfara has a capacity to generate about 16 megawatts of electricity. Are we doing that? Is it integrated to any major program? So probably I use the agriculture program as a typical example.
All right.
If you do not have a holistic national map of where infrastructure, okay, supports the rail sector, and where the rail sector is supported by the private sector, and where the private sector is supported by government, and then you have a bulk, okay, of what you now call your captive market or your primary market. And what is it? You have 200 million people with disposable income of 5 naira. How are you able to now give them services to make certain that you return 2 naira or 3 naira out of that 5 naira? That's the point I'm trying to make.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, Yushua Ango, the president did say that there will be a successor plan to ARGP, that's the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, which expires or runs out in the year 2020. And hopefully we'll return to planning as we used to know it in these parts, whether 5 years or 10 years. But some analysts would wonder on the basis of which we're going to be planning. For instance, no mention of a population census in 2020 or anytime soon.
I mean, that is, we have that challenge, and I know maybe part of the problem why we don't do these censuses is the cost element of it, but we need to ensure that we have enough data to plan. We cannot plan without data. Having said that, I also, maybe, I don't know that I'll have the opportunity, but let me say that both the executive and legislature have done well. I mean, at least in getting this budget presented, and I hope also to be deliberated upon and approved before the end of the year. Now, but another thing that I think we have seen from the budget clearly is that it's a realistic budget, it's a conservative budget. We are trying to really work with what we have. We have said at the beginning of this discussion that we have challenge of revenue, obviously, and that probably is why, from the comments of yesterday, one of the panelists was saying that we had a budget, a capital budget of 2-point-something billion, trillion, sorry, for a country. This is too small and all that. That is also true, but I think there are 2 things or 3 things that we need to do. One, the National Assembly should, as much as possible, look at this budget dispassionately, remove whatever is not necessary, but please, they should not add their own. You know, they shouldn't add their own, which is the normal thing that has been happening before, which they call constituency projects, or which is also referred to as padding. They shouldn't do that. The second thing, which is important, you know, even the 2.14 or thereabout trillion we have, as much of it that we can spend and to patronize Nigerian businesses, Nigerian people, the more we can do that, the better, rather than exporting those businesses to outsiders and providing employment, you know, to outsiders. If we do that, then gradually our own revenue base will also increase.
Okay, we'd like to thank you, Yushua Ango. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution this morning. We're just trying to round off this edition of the program. But before that, let's get your final comment. You're aware of the 7th, 8th, and now the 9th Assembly. Taking from what Yushua just said, are there assurances that National Assembly will this time expedite action on the budget without what Ango said, padding, and again without also being a rubber stamp?
Well, before I made my comment, I want to correct 2 statements quickly. Number one, a statement that was made that the president said there won't be any employment. That's not correct. What the president said is that any MDA that want to employ should seek for approval. Okay. That's number one. Number two, on the issue of 25% threshold, what I said is that the National Assembly will look at implementation challenges. Whether there are going to be any implementation challenges, we will get them. Now, on the issue of one of the producers of this program mentioned that we have the power, even Doctor said we have the power of approving the budgets. Mm-hmm. So if we have the authority and power to approve, amend, add, and insert, I don't think if the action of the National Assembly will be seen as padding or illegality, because the bottom line of a budget document is about the people.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you indeed. Honorable Babangida Ibrahim, Chairman, House Committee on Capital Market and Institutions, thank you very much indeed for coming this morning. And Joshua Ango, Dean, Postgraduate School, Kaduna State University, we thank you for your thoughts this morning. And of course, Dr. Emeka Okengu, who has become a regular here when we're talking about finance. Emeka, thank you for your contributions. Now, let's take you on sports.
Wilfred